Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is going to be a brief little review for Natsuyuki Rendezvous, Episode 2. A lot of stuff going on in this episode, and it's actually a week later that we pick up with this episode, and not much has happened between Hazuki and Roka as far as, what follows from him saying he loved her, essentially, and that they should have a sort of affair. Now, I guess this is because even though her husband is deceased and still very much a ghostly haunt around the flower shop that she owns, I guess it was never officialized on paperwork that in his absence they would no longer be considered married, whatever. I don't know how that all works, but essentially they feel like it would be having an affair for Roka and Hazuki to get together. And she's actually mulling over why Hazuki hasn't made any further move on her in this week that's expired since. And it turns out that it's very much because of Atsushi, her ghostly husband. Every time they try to get close, whether it be just running the mechanism of the flower shop business or him trying to actually get close to her, Atsushi, he gets in the way. He interferes. He ends up making googly eyes and sticking his tongue out and what would otherwise be hilarious faces. And I have to admit, I chuckled during that whole segment when they were showing the kind of faces and things he would do. He would get in between them, show the back of his head to Hazuki, so he couldn't see her and everything. It was pretty hilarious, but Hazuki is understandably very put off by this because he just wants to be close to this woman that he has fallen for, and her husband just won't let it happen, even from beyond the grave. So it's very interesting how this dynamic plays out, especially when Atsushi actually calls Hazuki a chicken. He's mocking him, he's being playful, but surprisingly, I think as much to Atsushi as myself watching the episode, this prompts Hazuki to actually stand up and ask Roka out on a date. And so they go on this date, and I loved this whole sequence of them realizing they're eating garlic, and like oh great, I wanted to kiss her, and all that kind of stuff. And then as they're walking home, we see that Roka is actually, this is the first exhilaration she's had since losing her husband, since her husband was alive. And I really believe with what we see in Roka's character in this episode, that she wants this. She wants to feel that happiness again. She becomes very coy and very almost like a teenager again. She goes to grab Hazuki's hand as they're walking home, and she plants a kiss on him, and she makes a comment about how their breath both stinks, but then she runs away like a schoolgirl, tells him not to follow her because they'll be through, that kind of thing. And it's just a really cute, playful way for that all to play out. But of course, he does end up following her back home, and she invites him in for tea. And this is where things take a sudden turn, because of course, there is Atsushi waiting to see how this is going to play out, waiting to interfere. And we think he's probably going to do it in the same way. And it starts off the same way as Hazuki ends up pushing himself on her a little bit. But we see that they both kind of want to be together. And Atsushi doesn't want this. And whereas he's been playful up to this point, he's been making his faces and doing that kind of stuff, now he actually says no one can have her. And so the tables are turned, essentially. Atsushi just ruins the moment, and Hazuki ends up ruining the moment because in his frustration, he says out loud, "I'll make her forget her husband." And of course, there's Roka laying there, sort of waiting to be caught up by this enrapturous moment, and then it all comes crashing down because she still very much has this deep sadness for the loss of her husband. So, basically she, after smacking his face, she sends Hazuki home, and it isn't until the next morning that they are brought back together when it turns out she slept at the table all night. She's very sick now, and which is kind of odd that she becomes so sick overnight, but basically Atsushi being a spirit and unable to do anything, he's freaking out, but she just manages to get a couple cell phone messages, texts, I guess, out to both Hazuki and Miho, the sister-in-law who's been helping out at the store. So Hazuki gets there, and we see that Atsushi is very ticked off that he's the one who shows up. "Oh, you're trying to be the hero, are you?" That's kind of what he says to him. And but Hazuki ends up basically getting her into bed, and we see that as she's crying in this state of delirium in this bed, she's apologizing to her deceased husband. We really don't know for what. Is it because of what happened, what transpired the night before, the fact that she tried to get with Hazuki? It could be anything. It could even just be the throes of delirium, but he basically says, as we end the episode, I should be the one crying, so there's a lot of deep stuff. Also revelations as far as it seems like he succumbed to cancer. That's what took his life. We see flashbacks to him in the hospital bed preparing the divorce papers for her once he is gone and everything like that, and she just tears it up right away. And I love that she loves him so much. She's not going to let him ruin that, even in death. And that's where we also see why he didn't end up moving on. Basically, as she was pouring her heart out, crying over his lifeless body, he is the spirit floating above the bed trying to embrace her, and she says, please don't leave me, and so he vows in that moment he's not going to leave her. Even as he's left his body, his life has left him, he's still going to remain behind and keep an eye on her and that kind of thing. And it's really just a sentimental moment, and I got misty-eyed as she's bawling her eyes out, pleading for him not to go and that kind of thing. Something I could relate to, but even if you don't personally relate to it, it's something that'll get you. I'd be surprised if it didn't. And the musical cues that play through segments like this in this episode are just really poignant. I mean, whether it's a melancholy, sort of sad little melody, or whether it's actually something a little more whimsical, it captures the essence of the emotion in the scene. And so I really found this to be a thoroughly enjoyable episode, even more so than the first one. I think this is my favorite of the two so far, and I can't wait to see how this is all going to play out. And I think the run is 11 episodes, so I would love to hear from you guys. If you've seen this series, what do you think of it so far? I basically think it's a lot better than I thought it would be going into it. And so yeah, are you going to stick with it? What did you think of the episode? Post that in the comments below or as a video response. And otherwise, I hope you guys are all doing well. So that's going to be it for me, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.